This is the webinar for the Colorado Emergent Literacy Scales, or CELS, for grades K through 3. This assessment is also known as the Dynamic Learning Maps Align K through 3 Literacy Alternate Assessment. This is Gina Quintana. I am the Significant Support Needs Specialist here at the Colorado Department of Education. Just a little bit of background on why we are talking about this assessment. House Bill 1238, also known as the Colorado Reading to Ensure Academic Development Act, or the READ Act, was signed into law and became effective July 1st, 2012. The first paragraph in this READ Act states that all students can succeed in school if they have the foundational skills necessary for academic success. This READ Act requires teachers to assess the literacy development of all students in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade. It also states that personnel must use an improved interim assessment to measure each child's reading competency. If the child is found to have a significant reading deficiency, or SRD, diagnostic tools are used for further analysis of the child's reading needs. All means every learner. The Colorado Attorney General confirmed that the READ Act is for every child in kindergarten through 3rd grade. At one time, students were exempt from this assessment for a variety of reasons. However, the legislation is for all general education students. Students receive special education services are general education learners first. Special education is a supplement to general education. It's also important to remember that the presence or suspicion of a disability does not warrant a child to be exempted or excluded from the READ Act. This would be a violation of the student's 504 rights. There is another webinar titled Differentiated Pathways, which goes through each of the differentiated pathways for students who may have been exempted from the READ Act in previous years. For this webinar, I will only be speaking about differentiated path 3, number 3, and that is the Colorado Emergent Literacy Scales. So as we heard from the Attorney General, the first question I asked was, what does this mean for students with a significant cognitive disability? In my experience, there is no valid or reliable reading screener for these students. So what were we going to do? I was at a DLM meeting. For those of you who don't know, the Dynamic Learning Map Assessment is for students in grades 3 through 11. It is our state alternate assessment. I had been attending one of the meetings, and I was overhearing Dr. Erickson and the consultant from Iowa, and they were having a conversation about Iowa's READ Act and the need for an assessment. So I asked to be part of that conversation, and from that, an assessment was developed for Colorado that was adapted for us based on the Iowa assessment. Dr. Karen Erickson and her crew at the Center for Disability Studies at UNC are the primary authors of this assessment. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure that we know which students we're talking about. We're talking about students who are receiving their instruction using the Alternate Achievement Standards, or the EEOs. During the IEP process, a decision is made about which standards the students will receive their instruction. And so it is my understanding that these decisions have already been made, and so you know which students we are talking about. You will hear me go back and forth between extended evidence outcomes and essential elements. EEO is a Colorado term. EEs are what DLM uses. But through our standard side-by-side reference tool for English language arts, which you see here, one page of it, we have laid out for you the EEOs and the EEs. so that you are able to see the alignment. And this is a great tool to use for writing IEP goals and objectives. They have been laid out. You can see the concept area, the skills, the big idea, and the essential questions for the EEs. So the EEs align nicely with the EEOs. They are just more discrete skills than the EEOs. The EEOs are a little more general or broad. So this is a very useful tool. You will see in the tabs below that they are in pre-K through 12th grade ELA. This is accessible on the Colorado Department of Education's website, and I have given you the link in the previous slide. Before we can begin talking about this assessment or this process, we need to talk a little bit about communication. For you and I and everybody else, there are 4 basic reasons for communication: to refuse things you don't want, to obtain those things you do, to engage in social interactions, and to provide or seek information. But why is it important for us to teach communication? For our students specifically, it's important that they are empowered through communication, that they can have some control in their life, even if it's deciding what shirt they want to wear or how they want to wear their hair, what they want to have for lunch. To be able to convey what they've learned in school or otherwise, to express their emotions, and to develop or maintain social networks and friendships. For the purpose of this webinar, we will be talking about the ability to convey what has been learned. It's important to understand the difference between communication and a schedule. When I talk about a communication system that is functional, effective, efficient, I am talking about everything from low tech, whether that's objects and pictures, all the way up through some kind of AAC device, such as a Dynavox Tobii or something like that, on an iPad. It's important that students have vocabulary that is related to literacy and not just a schedule. There are times when I see a communication system, the only vocabulary on there is the child's schedule. And if you look at the schedule on the right, if this is the only words a kid has for communication, and I ask them who the main character of the story is, the student has no way to tell me because all he has is a schedule. Core vocabulary is a great way to be thinking about that academic vocabulary for this population of students. It is a limited set of highly useful words that apply across many settings. It's made up primarily of pronouns, verbs, descriptors, and prepositions, and very few nouns or proper nouns, because you don't always need those across every environment. So if I teach a student the math teacher's name, Mr. Smith, that is only going to be helpful for him in a school setting, but won't be helpful in other settings. And then it's a consistent location. There's a consistent location of the vocabulary. So we have to be careful that if we have taught a student a vocabulary word on a device, that location is consistent, and we don't want to be moving that around for the child. Core vocabulary is, my guess is that your SLP is very well versed in core vocabulary and can be a great support and resource for you in this development. The DLM and the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies did a research study on the most common vocabulary used in the DLM assessments, and have come up with what they are calling the first 40 grid. Now you can go on their website and Google core vocabulary, and you can see a lot more vocabulary based on frequency. But for DLM, we're talking about the first 40. And so it would be up to your IEP team, your student's IEP team, to decide which words that we're going to start working on and teaching. Now, you wouldn't necessarily give a student all 40 words at the same time, but the team can make a decision on which first word, first 2 words, first 3 words that you will get started with. This is just an example of what core vocabulary might look like on a device using, obviously, Boardmaker. There's a module for that. You may hear me throughout this presentation talk about the DLM modules. They are available for Colorado teachers. You can find them at dynamiclearningmaps.org. At the end of the presentation, I have a step-by-step on how to access these. There are 50 different modules. Some of them, a couple of them, probably 6 or 8, are around foundational skills for your very foundational or emergent learners. There are ELA modules and there are math modules. They are in 2 forms. You can either do them in a self-directed module, so sitting by yourself in front of your computer, taking a pre-test, listening to a presentation, doing some activities, and doing a post-test. And at the end, you will be eligible for a 1 hour of clock hours for recertification. They're also available in a facilitated module. So if you want to sit with a group, maybe other teachers or an IEP team or peer educators, to work on through the module together. All the materials you have or that you need are right there for you. There is one specifically for core vocabulary and communication, and this is the link for that one. Communication is everyone's job, not just the speech therapist. For typically developing children, they are exposed to oral language for approximately 4,380 waking hours by the age 18 months. If we only worked on communication with the SLP at 2 times a week, 20 to 30 minutes each time, it would take a student 84 years to learn 1 symbol. So how do we get communication and the kid's communication into his entire school day, as well as at home? Communication is the path to literacy. For many children with a significant cognitive disability who may also have additional disabilities, we cannot proceed down the path of literacy with confidence until we ensure that the child has a system in place for receptive and expressive communication. It's important that they have a way to show what they know and what they have learned. Do each one of your students have an effective, efficient, and functional communication system? Do they have vocabulary on their system that is literacy based or that allows them to answer questions? A couple of resources that I would like to share with you. The first one is the Communication Matrix. This is a great assessment instrument for individuals at those very early stages of communication. Sometimes it's hard for us as teachers to figure out how to get started and how he is showing his communication. Many times it's through behavior. So this assessment allows you to assess the student. It is free. It is in an online format. And you go through and answer questions about the student, and then it gives you a chart, which I will show you on the next slide. Every Move Counts is another assessment that you can use. It's a sensory-based approach to communication. This one is not free, but the website does give you a lot of information, and in order to give the assessment, you would have to order the book. Here is an example of the Communication Matrix. You can see where somebody has filled it in. This prints off for you free after you answer the questions. So for this student, you can see they are past the pre-intentional level, past the intentional level. They're in unconventional communication. And the blue ones show the skills the student has mastered. The white boxes show what he doesn't use, and the yellow shows some emerging skills. So this gives you a great idea on what the kid knows and what skills you could be working on. So I want to leave you with this. about communication. Without communication, there's no relationship, no concept development, no language, no literacy. It is a life of isolation, behavior issues, learned helplessness, and diminished quality. This was written by a dear colleague and friend, Kathy Keller-Scoggin. So let's talk about the Colorado Emergent Literacy Scales. You will hear me go back and forth between DLM Aligned and the CELS. It was originally named DLM Aligned Literacy Assessment by the writers, and I am working on getting it changed. I think we're going to be okay with the Colorado Emergent Literacy Scales, or the CELS. So what I would like to do is have you pause the webinar right now and review the following documents. You have 3 of them on the web page: the CELS Introduction, the CELS Scoring Guide, and the CELS Scoring Sheet. Stop the video now. Okay, now that you have looked through the documents, you kind of have an idea of what we're talking about. Anytime you write an assessment, you start with a test blueprint. This approach allows teachers, you start with a blueprint, which is the skills that will be assessed on the assessment. The CELS was developed looking at the blueprint for grades 3 through 5 DLM, and then it brought the skills down to grades K through 3. Looking at this really allows teachers of primary grade students with significant cognitive disabilities to monitor progress towards the skills and understandings that will be required for success in 3rd grade and beyond. So it's aligning with our current assessment. It's aligning instruction so that our kids, when they have to take the assessment at 3rd grade, the DLM, they're going to be ready because they will have been taught some of these skills in a lineal trajectory. This assessment, or the assessment blueprint, really talks about the scope of skills and understandings that are assessed. So it will be important to take a look at that blueprint. Here is just a little portion of Scale 1 from the blueprint, so you can see which skills are being assessed through this framework. This is available, the whole thing in its entirety, on page 5 of the introduction manual. Again, this assessment is comprised of 6 scales that reflect the knowledge, skills, and understandings that are required by that assessment blueprint. It does capture early development, those early foundational skills that are at the kindergarten, 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade level. So each student, even those at the most foundational levels, will be able to access this framework. For those who are not yet meeting these targets and require additional they will require intensive interventions to help them close the gap. We're really looking at students who are meeting grade level targets based on the EEOs. The essential elements are drawn from 5 of the 6 strands of ELA Colorado academic standards. We are looking at reading literature, reading information text, reading foundations, writing, and language. It's important to note that the 6th standard is speaking and listening, and it's not included in this framework because it's not really assessed in grades 3 through 11 in Colorado on the DLM. And truthfully, it is really hard to assess these skills through this format of a framework or assessment. So it's not to say that these aren't important skills and we shouldn't be working on them. They're just not assessed through this framework. Here are the scales. As I said before, they are aligned to the Colorado Academic Standards. And they start on page 9 of the introductory manual. We will go through the scales in a moment. To add consistency to the overall system and ensure that each scale had 10 points, some of the scales also include steps beyond the second grade target or third grade target, or successor skills that stretch through the third grade and fourth grade expectations. So here is an example of a mini map, and if you haven't discovered these yet, these are a pretty amazing tool, especially if you're teaching the older grades, grades 3 through 11. They are not developed in the younger grades yet, but they can be quite helpful. So as you can see in the yellow box, that is the target skill that you are working on. And all the things above it, starting at the initial precursor level, which are usually your foundational skills, and all the skills that you can be working on in order to get that student to the target goal. And then there are some kids who will achieve beyond the target goal, and that's your successor goal. And so this is available for every single essential element in DLM. And I have written for you step by step how to get to these for each one of the EEs. And that is later in the webinar as well. So each of the scales has a outcome statement. So here is your scale 5 for writing, text type, and purposes. And here is your outcome. The student can select a topic and use drawing, dictating, or writing to compose a message. Each of the 10 points on the scale has a description that's linked to the learning map in the English Language Arts as created by the DLM Assessment Consortium. So just a little bit of information. As of May 2014, there were 1,654 nodes in the English Language Arts map. So these nodes are those skills, those discrete skills, or the EEs that we were talking about. There are 2,300 in math and 141 foundational skills. So those are the ones I was telling you that are for those real early learners. Additionally, there are more than 8,000 connections to these modes. So if you look at a small portion of the DLM map, you will see in those in the boxes are what are called nodes. So your student may be working on one of those skills, but you can also see how these skills are connected to other skills. So kids in this population learn very differently, and so it's important that we don't expect kids to learn, you know, you learn this and then you learn this and then you learn this in a like in a horizontal learning, because our kids don't learn like that. They may, but many times we see how some of these skills develop and then they miss some skills, and this is where we see splinter skills. So if we laid out all of the nodes together, it would look like this. Remember, I told you they were 1,000, over 1,000. And if you printed this off and all of the connections, it would take about 6 city blocks on a piece of paper to lay all of these out. So that is a lot of information. The structure of the assessment, it is, and you'll hear me go back and forth between assessment or framework, because I really want people to start thinking about this as a framework for instruction. And this is what I was talking about a minute ago, because we know that our students with significant cognitive disabilities, will progress at dramatically different rates. So each of these 6 scales have 10 points. You can see the points here across the top. The structure of this assessment is really looking at the specific grade level targets that are identified for each of the 4 grade levels. But the assessment itself, or the frameworks itself, is designed to track progress across the grade levels rather than within grade levels. So if you look here in the bottom, you will see The kindergarten target is those skills 1 through 5. The first grade target, 6. So it's 1 through 5 plus 6. The second grade target is 1 through 6 plus 7 and 8. And then our third grade target is 1 through 5 plus 6 plus 7, 8, 9, 10. And the beauty of this is that you may have a third grader who may still be working on number 3, draws or selects meaningful images or tactile representations as topics for writing, down there at point 3. So like I said, we're really looking at kids on a vertical plane as well as instead of a horizontal one. So a third grader will be working on all of these, or could be working on all of these. The goal is not just for students to achieve the highest score possible, but also for them to demonstrate knowledge, skills, and understandings associated with each point on that scale. So just a quick note about reporting. The data should be collected during the first week of school. Data points should be collected in the fall, winter, and spring. For this year, you may probably only have 1 or 2 data points. But looking at next year, it will be important to start thinking about how to roll this out starting that first week of school. For data reporting on the READ Act, which opens April 1st, no score for this assessment is recorded with CDE. So as I said, we're really working on those 10 points. And so our goal is not to get to 60, or it is to get to 60, but we want kids working at their and progressing at their levels. So there is no cut score on for this assessment. Just by virtue of their disability, they are probably a student with a significant reading deficiency. So in the scoring for code 13 is where these students would come out. It's a special education student. It says unable to access one of the improved interim assessments, and they are tested using alternative approved measures. So you'll have 2 questions. Did the student use an alternative or differentiated pathway? Yes. Does the student have a significant reading deficiency? Yes. Again, there is no score recorded. So let's talk a little bit about collecting the data for this framework. I would venture to guess that many of you are already doing this. And so these scales just provide a framework for organization as well as for looking at what skills a student has mastered and what skills they need to be working on. It is based upon a structured portfolio, instructionally embedded assessments. So hopefully each one of your students are involved in a comprehensive literacy instruction. We know the research says for all students, 90 minutes a day is what is recommended, and that's for ELA, reading, writing, language, and speaking and listening. So we want to make sure that all students have this comprehensive literacy instruction. One of the approaches is has been around for a long time. It's not new. It's 4 blocks of literacy. And there is a book that is available looking at this population's children with disabilities, reading and writing the 4 blocks way. I do know that it is currently being not rewritten, but added to, but it is still available. And the 4 blocks are shared or guided reading, writing, working with words, and self-selected reading. So this structured portfolio is a strengths-based approach to assessment that focuses on what students can do rather than what they cannot do. It's a collection of materials and information or artifacts that are systematically created over a period of time, organized in a way that reflects the student's knowledge, skills, and understandings and it's rated by the members of the team. It's really important to understand that this framework isn't a snapshot or a moment in time kind of assessment. It's not like every Friday at 1 o'clock we are going to do our assessments. It is naturalistic, and it's done during instruction. So we're taking this data as we're holding our reading groups and concentrating on one of the scales and thinking, okay, Johnny is working on scale 1, point number 2, and paying attention to that. So it's real life competencies, real life instruction as it's happening, trying to get that picture of the student's abilities in a variety of environments and activities. It's not an assessment event, as I just said. It's not something that occurs before or after instruction, but actually during instruction. And it does not assess skills in isolation. It's ongoing, so you're looking at it all year round. You're collecting those artifacts. It occurs every day during instruction. It assesses a variety of skills and abilities in a meaningful context, activity, or lesson. So to get started, you need a copy of your Colorado Emergent Literacy Scales. Comprehensive literacy instruction is ongoing, a method for collecting the data, and then a system for organizing the data. So as I'm talking about how collecting the data, be thinking about what you already have in place and how you can just lay the CELS over what you are already currently doing and what little tweaks you may need to make. So you collect the data daily during literacy-based instruction, anytime an observation is made in the context of literacy-based interactions. Across multiple settings, a student might say M starts for McDonald's, McDonald's starts with M, and then you have a data point there that you may collect through your process, through your anecdotal notes. So some methods for collecting data are work samples, photographs, videos, anecdotal notes, and frequency counts. Again, these are things that you probably already are doing, but now we're just offering a framework for this. So work samples, any piece of physical evidence that is genuinely completed and produced by a student that can serve as a data source. So something they have written, an art project. Here is an example of a student who uses an alternate pencil. If you're not familiar with alternate pencils, there is a module for that, so that each student has a way to write. We're not talking anymore about pencil to a piece of paper to assess writing. We're really talking about the student's ability to get their thoughts in writing, even if they need to do it through an alternate pencil or a scribe. So this is a writing journal for a student that was taken on August 31st. The topic the student chose was My Weekend, and you see she's written a variety of letters. And using alternate pencils, as a teacher, my first inkling is to say, there's a lot of Q's there. I wonder what that means. Q, lots of Q's. We're really not looking at the meaning, because we cannot ever really pretend to know what our student is thinking as they're writing in their journal. The word play is there because that is how we would model. I would say to my student, oh, I see, this is what you wrote about your weekend. If I wrote about my weekend, I would write this, and this is what it would look like for me. So you're doing some of that modeling as they have written their thoughts down. Alternate pencils. Videos. Video is another way to capture a student's abilities and or progress from daily instruction that can serve as a data source. This is a great way not only to be able to capture what the student is doing, but also to look at your instruction. I know one of the things that I always notice is that I had to pay attention to wait time, that I wasn't always giving my students enough wait time. And those are things that you can capture from videos, as well as what your student knows. Another way is anecdotal notes. This is probably one of the most common things that we as special educators use, because sometimes the data sheets just don't meet our needs. And so we have to write out exactly what it is our student is doing. This teacher did this very clever thing where she is using name badges, like sticky back name badges that you run through a computer, and she's just using these. She puts the student's name, the date, what book they're reading, and then what the student did during that activity. And then at the end of the day, either she or her para takes a sticky note and puts it in the kid's file for whichever scale they are working on. This to me was very clever. I wish I had invented it, because I remember in my day when I was in the classroom, I would write, and then I would have to transcribe my notes into the child's folder. So this is a clever way to take out that middle step. This is what it looks like on her clipboard, where she again writes the student name, the date, and what the student did. This is another way that a teacher takes notes using just index cards, putting the student's name, the date, what scale the student is working on, and what the student did. Other ways are frequency counts and other traditional recording data forms that you may already be using, checklists, rubrics, that kind of thing. Here's an example of a check sheet that a teacher is using for her student. So as you see, there are many ways that you are probably already doing to gather data on your student. This is just an example of an independent writing assignment. What the note says, and then more importantly, what has happened, and the student using the letter S in his writing to demonstrate his understanding that writing can say what he wants to say, S for Superman in this case. And then when he draws a picture, that also supports the understanding. So see a variety of things to show that student's skill. Here's another example of a student writing using an alternate pencil. You see a variety of A's and E's and F's all in a line, and then they tell you when they're done writing. Here's an example of a student's writing book. So take a moment, if you're doing this webinar with several people, to stop the video and talk about what are some of the ways that you are currently collecting data. Are you already using a structured portfolio, and how is it working? And then how can this, the stuff you are collecting, be incorporated into a structured portfolio? So there are a variety of ways that you can organize your structured portfolio. You can use a digital or electronic format, storing things on the computer. Binders are a great way, as are file folders, clipboards, mailing labels, or journals. There's just a plethora of ways that you can organize this data. It's important that we are talking to other teachers, because someone may have an organizational system that you hadn't thought of that might be helpful for you. For example, the one teacher who uses the name labels, I had never thought about that, and it's a great way to organize your data. So let's take a moment and start looking at the scales. You have a scale, a scoring sheet that you can be looking at, as well as examples of how to assess the students in your scoring guide. The first scale is reading, literature, and information, text, key ideas, and details. So you can see at the very first level, understands words associated with objects used during familiar book sharing routines. So how do we make sure that our kids are entering into this and can do that first objective, and then work through the scales, identifying familiar people, naming objects or pictures, all the way through orders, events, and new text as first and next. So you can see the progression of skills going from left to right, starting with those early foundational skills at the kindergarten target level. In scale 2, we are looking at key ideas and details as done in maybe a shared reading activity. Expressing interest during a shared reading activity. Is that student there with you? Is he paying attention? Is he listening? All the way through engagement and then identifying feelings of characters in a new story. Scale 3 is looking at reading informational text, the integration of knowledge and ideas. Again, starting with that very foundational skill of demonstrating understanding of familiar books during shared routines. So in your scoring guide, you have the definition of familiar and familiar text, which is going to be important, all the way through new text, because there are very different skills between that familiar and that new text. And then all the way through identifying two related points the author makes in the new text. In scale 4, we're looking at letter identification, expressing interest at that foundational level during print or braille-based interactions, all the way through in context demonstrating basic knowledge of letter-sound relationships. In scale 5, we are looking at writing, choosing between objects when selecting a topic for writing. Again, there are modules on selecting a topic for writing. There is a module on alternate pencils. There are several writing modules on the DLM website. This is one of the harder skills for our students, especially if they have physical or motorical limitations. Scale 6, we're looking at vocabulary acquisition and use. You can see the EEs that are laid out for you, and then the skills in starting with the foundational levels with guidance and support, using sign symbols or words to communicate purpose, all the way through determining literal meaning of words and phrases in the context of shared reading and writing interactions. Also in your scoring manual, there are examples of what guidance and support means, because you will see in the earlier grades there is where students show their skills and they may need guidance and support, and then moving through the different skills where that guidance and support is not needed. Also available in the scoring guide is each one of the scales, and we have aligned them to the DLM module. So if you are unsure about scale 1, there are 3 modules that you can be looking at: generate purpose for reading, shared reading, and anchor read and apply. Now I know there are several modules listed that are helpful, but if you can only do a couple, the ones in red are probably the most helpful, and then you will see that some of them overlap. So this is a tool that was developed to assist teachers with the instruction on these scales and aligning them with the modules. So for the score sheet, as I said before, data collection begins during the first week of school. I realize that we are later in the year, and so if we can at least get one data point before before they're reported. The reporting actually opens April 1st through June 1st, so there is some time. The way that you score this framework is the team chooses 3 artifacts for each of the scales that provides the best evidence for the student's knowledge, skills, and understanding. So if you're looking at scale 1, you look at all the artifacts that have been collected during that time period and choosing the 3 as a team, as an IEP team, choosing the 3 that shows the best evidence of what your student knows, and then you score those top 3. The scores are entered on the score sheet or the cover page. It's the same thing. And then decisions about instruction changes and implementation are made. So now you know here's where your kid is on scale 2 with these 3 artifacts. We've determined that he is at a level 2. And so that you know, now here's level 3, here's what we need to be working towards. Those 3 artifacts show that he has mastered level 2. Here is your score sheet for scale 1. You have a packet that has all of them. It is available for you electronically in Excel format, and so that you are able to enter the scores and keep this information electronically. A couple of other ways to organize the portfolio were shared with me from a couple of teachers, and the first one is a recipe box. So this teacher has used the numbers corresponding to letters, so scale 1 would be A. He has put the scales taped them onto these dividers so that he can remember which ones go where, and then he is the one who uses the index cards that I shared with you, so you can stick into all your anecdotal data for scale 1 behind A, and then you will have them when you're ready to score. Another teacher uses a folder system, same thing with the either the mailing labels, sticky notes, or index cards. You can have one file folder for one student, or one file folder for one student for one scale, just depending on how you're organizing it. So these are just a couple of examples that were shared with me. I want to give you a couple of resources before we end. The first one being the Dynamic Learning Maps website, dynamiclearningmaps.org, and I have given you step by step how to get to the professional development modules that I keep talking about. They're organized by claim or organized alphabetically. I find it easier to look at them alphabetically. There's the facilitated ones that I spoke about, the self-directed ones, and then the ones that are aligned with the scales that from that document I just showed you previously. So this is step by step on how to get to those modules. The mini maps, where I showed you we're working towards a target, and here are all the things, the skills to be working on to get to the target. Here is how to get to those. Now they are only available grades 3 through 12, but you will see some of the EEs run across grade levels. So this might be helpful for you in grades K through 2, but it does start in grade 3. Another resource that if you're not familiar with is Tar Heel Reader. Tar Heel Reader is our books. They're electronic books done in PowerPoint format that are high interest and low reading level. This is really good for kids in the older grades. They are organized by topic. There is a search button so that you can find something that is of interest to the kids. They're listed by grade level, by subject level, and what's really cool is you can find different topics, especially how some of our kids have very different areas of interest. I worked with a little kid who I said, what do you want to read about? And he said vacuums, V-A-C-U-U-M, vacuum. And so we put vacuum in the subject area, and lo and behold, we had about 6 or 7 books about vacuums. The books can be read to the student. You have to make sure that you set up your computer to do so. It's just a little gear change on, where you says it either reads to you or it doesn't. And then it reads in different voices, male or female or child. It is a pretty mechanical voice, but it does read to the student. And then the other cool thing is if the student is using a tablet, they can be downloaded onto the various tablets so the student can have their books to read. You can also write your own. So if you are looking for a topic that just isn't there, you you can write your own, and it takes you through the steps. You will need an invitation code. You are welcome to email me for that invitation code, and I'm happy to share that with you. So I want to leave you with this. Literacy is the single most significant skill needed to function effectively in school, in the workplace, and in society. It is vital to a successful education, career, and quality of life. It is the most functional skill that we can teach our students. Many times I get that question, shouldn't we be working on functional skills such as feeding, self-care, and those things? And my answer is always yes, but reading is also a functional skill. And so with that, I want to thank you for your time this afternoon. We're just under an hour. If you have additional questions, you are welcome to contact me specifically about the CELS assessment, and you can contact Ellen Hunter for other questions about the READ Act or the READ Act of Students with Disabilities and the differentiated pathways. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and I look forward to hearing from you.